All right. Well, happy Easter. A reminder from last week, He is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia. It's never too late to say that, even though Easter has officially come and gone. It's the reason we gather every Sunday to celebrate His victory for us. And today what we're doing is we're kicking off a new sermon series entitled Living Chosen, which for us is both this reminder of who we are as sons and daughters in Jesus. It's also this calling of what we are called to do as His chosen ones. So I'm going to pause here for just a minute. If anybody needs sermon handout notes, Mike's got them. They'll be helpful. If not, Mike, it looks like you need to fill them all out. But so with that, we are diving into the series. And in many ways, this is what many churches would call a vision series, because we're going to kind of lay out over the next several weeks who we are and where we're going as a church. And yet, it's also applicable to us as individuals of this reminder of who God is and what He's done for us. And so today, as we think about this, we're entering into a new season of ministry because a lot has happened in the past years. And I know that as I say a new beginning or a new season of ministry, whether it's for you personally or maybe it's for us as a church, there comes with that a little bit of excitement and apprehension. There's excitement. Yes, we're going to do something new. New things are happening. It's going to be exciting times. But there also may be some levels of apprehension, fear, anxiety, because you start thinking, oh no, what are they going to change? What are they going to mess with? What are they going to do? And yet, as we sit here today as individuals and collectively as the church, it's an exciting time. It's going to be full of challenges and trials along the way, and yet we're reminded that God goes with us each and every day. And that's both for us as individuals and collectively as a church. And as a church, we've been through a lot the past few years. Like everyone in the world, we navigated a worldwide pandemic. We saw our beloved senior pastor of 37 years retire. We've been through this season of searching called the call process for almost 2 years. And then starting last September, we began this 5-2 process, a strategic growth process, and they, as an organization, have been walking with us to help us discover who we are and discern where is God leading us in this next season of ministry here at Mount Olive. And for some of us, it may have felt like we were wandering or we didn't exactly know where we were going, and there's some truth to that, and yet I would say God has been walking with us every step of the way. But now, as things are a little bit clearer and where God is leading us, the time is now for us to begin making plans and yet leaving room for God to establish our steps. And this is what it says in Proverbs chapter 16. The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. And I think this is true for both us as individuals. We have plans, we have ideas of how life is supposed to go and what the next step is and what the future holds, and yet ultimately it's God who is in control. It's God who establishes and tells us what's next and shows us what's next. And for us as a church, we have gone through this process, starting back in September and October and November, and we got together as the church body, and we said, what do we love about Mount Olive? And the reality is that there is a lot to love. We have amazing people who are genuinely warm and welcoming. They're caring, they're helpful, they care for one another. We have a great staff that holds this place together and does a lot of amazing things. You see it every Sunday. Karen leads worship and puts together the services. Leanne is back there with mostly my kids, but every Sunday she has an awesome time prepared for kids, and they have a great time every single week. Melissa kind of is the glue that holds the office together. We've also got amazing volunteers who give their time and their energy to help keep this place looking good, running smoothly, making big decisions, all on a volunteer basis. We have down the hallway an amazing preschool, one of the best preschools in the nation, and definitely in this area, that is led by a staff that cares for and shares the love of Jesus with 60 kids every single day. Our VBS is one of the best in the area, and 2 months out, we already have a wait list, which is amazing. And so after service, make sure you go to that table and fill out ways that you can sign up to help, whether it's donating your time or something else. Go check out the table. But we've got other things happening, lots of good things here at Mount Olive. And through this process, we've also learned that, there's some things that are missing. And so we have this desire to see growth, to see expansion, to see more families with youth and kids a part of our community, and to live out this calling of being missional, engaging and serving the community on a regular basis. And these are all good things. And ultimately, this is where we feel God is leading us, both collectively as the church, but also as individuals. And in order to do that, we're going to have to think differently about ministry and how it is that we approach ministry. And this is where the kind of fear can begin to creep in, because what does that mean? And yet there's some good things that aren't going to change. Like, we are not going to give up our Lutheran identity. We're not going to give up preaching God's word faithfully every single Sunday. We're not going to give up serving and meeting the needs of people that are here. But what we are going to do is intentionally and purposefully think about this person. It's a persona named Balancing Brittany. And we'll learn more about Balancing Brittany in the coming weeks. But how is it that we serve her and her family's needs? Exciting times. And yet for us, both as individuals here, with the future ahead of us, as a congregation, there's this story from Numbers chapter 13 that provides us with this insight of how will we see the future? What will we see? And so to give us a little bit of context, the Israelites, they have been in the wilderness for a couple of years. God has delivered them out of Egypt. He's rescued them from slavery. He's dwelt among them in their camp. He has provided food for them daily. They have seen his hand at work, and now it is time for them to step into the promised land, at least initially. And so God calls Moses, and he says, Moses, I want you to send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. So this is the promised land, the land that God said, I will give you. And now it's time for you to step into that. So Moses gets the men together, and he sends them into the promised land to explore it for 40 days. And they do. And they come back and they say, hey, this land is great. It's flowing with milk and honey. Here's a sample of the fruit. It's this beautiful place. It's going to be great for us. But there's one small or big problem, and that's the people, the cities. They're fortified. They're large. There's no way that we can go in and attack these people because they are stronger than us. And it gets them so bad to the point where they say, it'd be better for us to go back to Egypt, or to have died in Egypt, to be slaves, than have to face this problem ahead of us. And for us, I wonder, is this where we are sometimes? We see the challenge, we see the obstacle, we see the walls around us, and we get overwhelmed. We get consumed or hyper-focused on the problems, and we forget this very important thing. Who is with us? Who was with them? Remember back in verse 1, God said, the land which I am giving you. And yet they lost sight of that. And I think sometimes we as people and what's next in our life is we forget that God is going with us into the future. And yes, there's challenges. Yes, there's problems. Yes, there's going to be difficult days. And yet he goes with us, and he's going to provide a way for us. Because that's what he's promised to do. That's what we see time and time again in our lives. in the lives of the people around us. God makes a way. And yet, in the midst of this, on one hand, you have the guy who says, or the group of people that say, we can't do this. The group is, the other people are too strong, too powerful, we don't have a chance. And yet there's this voice of reason, this voice of faith in the middle of that named Caleb. And he says this, yes, the land was great. And the Lord, if it pleases the Lord, he will lead us into that land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. So don't be afraid of the people, because the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. And see, this is where we are. And this is both individually, as we look down the road, what's coming, what's standing in our way, what are the obstacles. Maybe it's a health problem, maybe it's a financial problem, a relationship problem. And yet we're reminded, are we going to focus on the problem, or are we going to focus on who has promised to go with us into the future? And the same is true for us as a church. As we think about things differently, as we approach ministry from a different perspective and look at how it is that we live out our faith, are we going to focus on the challenges, the problems? Are we going to get hung up on how things used to be? Or are we going to step forward with faith and courage, trusting that God is going with us, trusting that God is showing us the way, that God is even potentially going to open up doors that we never even dreamed of or imagined before? It's an act of faith and courage. And as we think about this, as we think about where we are going, it's this reminder that throughout our past, from the moment that God planted us where we are, he did that with a purpose and with a plan, and that he has provided for us over and over in our past, that he has showed up time and time again, and he's promised to continue to show up day in and day out. And it's my hope and my prayer for us, both in our individual lives and the lives of our family, but also especially for Mount Olive, that God would do something so big and so great through this place that he is the only one who can take credit, that he is the only one who gets the glory, because ultimately that is what it's all about. Seeing God's people follow him, trust him, and seeing a kingdom impact. People coming to know and love Jesus in deep, life-changing, life-giving ways. And so for us as a church, which is both us individually and collectively, what we're going to be easing our way into over the course of who knows how long, but easing our way into this idea of being everyday missionaries and ambassadors who in the everyday moments of life where God has placed us to live, to work, and to play, to step into what God is already doing around us, to step into the ways in which he is already at work, and to shine a light, to speak to his goodness, to his faithfulness, to his love, to our neighbors, to our co-workers, to our teammates, to the people that God has intentionally and purposefully placed in our lives. It's this mindset that says, I am Christ's ambassador. I am a missionary in everything I do. See, because the reality is that the landscape of the world has changed drastically. There's so much data out there that since 2020 and the beginning of COVID, things have changed dramatically. And yet now more than ever, people need to hear the good news of Jesus. The good news that is the best news that reminds us that Jesus changes lives, that he restores souls, and that he makes life better. He makes life more fulfilling. He makes life more bearable, because we're reminded of this victory that we have, that he has overcome sin, death, and the power of the devil for you, for each one of us. And there's nothing better to share than that. And that's why we gathered last Sunday for Easter. It's why we gather each Sunday to be reminded of this victory that is ours in Christ. This victory that says, I have overcome the world for you. And that you have a place waiting for you, this ultimate promised land, heaven, eternity, in my presence. And so look forward to that. Find hope in that. Find hope in the midst of your challenges that I have overcome this challenge. Whether it's on this side of heaven or in heaven, it's paid for. It's been overcome for you. And yet what happens is sometimes we get sucked back into the reality of life, into the regular rhythm of life. And yes, we know that the resurrection is important. We know that Jesus is alive and that he's at work, and yet we forget that because we've got to go to work. We've got to sit in traffic. We've got to take tests and prepare for things and drive our kids around places, and it's hard to sometimes we lose sight of that. And I think for the disciples, we see that. They had already experienced a risen Lord twice. Jesus has told them what he wanted them to do. And yet what we see is 7 of his disciples, they've gone home. They've gone back to the Sea of Galilee. And maybe it was just for a weekend fishing trip before everything got back, kicked off officially. But it's also like maybe this is where they were comfortable. This is where they wanted to be because this is what they knew. And so we see Peter saying, I'm going fishing. And everyone else says, okay, we'll go with you. Because that's what they knew. That's what they were comfortable with. And yet as they go out into the boat, they fish all night and they catch nothing. Now you can imagine that these guys who were once professional fishermen, no doubt didn't lose their abilities over the course of the 3 years, but they're discouraged. Fishing is fun, but fishing is actually fun when you catch things. At least that's been my experience. And so for us and for the disciples, they see that this very important truth, that ultimately on their own they were unsuccessful, that their strength was not enough. For us, I think sometimes we feel this. We try to do things on our own because we lose sight of the victory that God has won. And that's when we typically get burned out or overwhelmed or tired or exhausted. And yet, what we see in this next scene, Jesus standing on the shore, saying, did you catch anything? No, which probably rubbed them the wrong way. It's like, yeah, we know we didn't catch anything. But then Jesus says, just throw the net on the right side. And as they do, they catch more fish than they can even handle. It's this miracle that only Jesus can do. It's this reminder that ultimately that Jesus is alive and that his power is still at work in the lives of his followers. We see this reminder that on our own we can't do it. Whether it's in our individual lives and the challenges we are facing individually, or whether it's stepping into this new season as a church, we can't do it on our own. We must rely on Christ and his power and stick with him in this idea that he is alive and his power is at work in us and through us. See, it's the story that we'll tell. It's the story of God's faithfulness, of God's loving kindness, of his protection, of his care each and every day, that he's won the victory for us and for our neighbors. It's this reminder that God ultimately provides what we need exactly when we need it. He's done it time and time again, and he's going to continue to do it time and time again. And so for us, so for you, as a follower of Jesus, as someone who loves Jesus, we step into this identity as one who has been chosen. And we step into this calling that we have to live as the light, to live as people who get to share God's goodness and love and faithfulness with the people around us. Because we live in a world where people so desperately need to hear it. And so as we begin this new season here, or a new beginning here as a church, or as you just look down the road and see the things in your life, that we step out in faith, trusting that God is going to continue to show us the way, and that he is going to lead us into the future that he has prepared for us as a church, as individuals. And I would encourage you to keep coming back for the next 6 weeks, as we're going to keep unpacking who are we? Where are we going? What has God called us to do? And it's an exciting time. There's definitely some challenges along the way, but we know that God goes with us. Today, he goes with us tomorrow, and he's going to go with us the day after that as well. And so find hope and peace and strength in that reality, because he is risen. He's risen indeed. Alleluia. I invite you to stand for our closing blessing.